Alright, so here's Just the Feels to tell us what he thinks about, history and class struggle. He's obviously gonna strawman it again, and understand absolutely nothing about Marxism. So what I'm gonna do is just highlight various portions, because it's mostly just him pontificating, and I wanna go over when he stakes claims, specifically, so... Go here. 107. Right before that.
According to Karl Marx, the primary factor influencing every decision ever made was what the individual stood to gain. Totally accepted.
So that's highly reductive. It's changes in the mode of production that was behind historical events.
He was an online personality today. Trying to figure out how this factors into the decisions of every individual ever was just a bit too much work, so he divides humanity into classes. As time progressed.
Yeah, because different people have different competing socioeconomic interests, especially if they're of a different socioeconomic caste.
And the economy changes, new classes emerge and seek to impose their economic self-interest by competing with the old classes.
There was still exploitation because the bourgeoisie, as we know them, didn't come about until the establishment of the capitalist mode of production, which was after feudalism, and before that there was the ancient mode of production, in which citizens siphoned surplus product from the slaves, and before that there was these quasi-communistic societies of hunting and gathering.
For the majority of European history, we had just events that took place only 60 years before. Marx has now successfully predicted events that took place only 60 years before he wrote them out in merchants. They found it in their economic interest to take control away from the nobility, and so they did it in the French Revolution.
Wrong. It wasn't just the French Revolution, because the capitalist mode of production became the dominant mode of production as feudalism was slowly eschewed, basically through less of an emphasis on land.
Has now successfully predicted events that took place only 60 years before he wrote the manifesto.
When did anybody say Marx predicted the French Revolution?
Of course, anyone can create a model that totally explains the past. It's more difficult to explain things that are still going on or what might happen in the future. But
that's why it's a historical analysis.
So he applied his materials into the context of an area that hadn't yet invented places to live in because land would be cheap relative to Europe. Sure, it might have great value. We can look back now and ask, how did he do? And the answer is, he ended up over 3.
No, he didn't.
The European bourgeois couldn't export that many goods to Africa because the natives didn't really have that much money or production.
What the fuck are you talking about? I must have missed this chapter of Capital or the Manifesto or literally any other of the essays or manuscripts he wrote, because I have never heard this claimed by Marx.
Of their own create goods to trade them for. Investment went overwhelmingly to more developed areas.
Literally, where did Marx ever say this? Like, I only read about his conceptions of the labor aristocracy, which he briefly touched on, as anything like regarding international trade, so I'm just gonna assume this is a straw man. 330.
Plus, Marx claimed it would be in the workers' interest to overthrow the capitalists and claim all their surplus value, which doesn't exist, to establish
that's a lie.
Single class which will be the only one in existence, thereby reaching the end of history. But this hasn't happened. The proletariat seems to prefer the stability offered by capitalism to the revolutionary justice offered by Marxian socialism.
Okay, that's a lie. So, oh my god, that is so wrong. That couldn't be further from the fucking truth. So then why are we trying to nationalize healthcare, get a minimum wage, subsidize unions, tax the rich more, incentivize co-ops, defund the police, all these things that lead to the reduction of bourgeoisie influence on the middle class? The reason we haven't had a proletariat revolution that includes toppling capitalism and is truly in the interests of workers, the reason we haven't had that yet is because the existing system, the bourgeoisie, has more guns than us, okay?
Marx said that this would happen in... But that's kind of a cop-out. So now we've examined Marx's
okay,
ratio,
yeah. The only one copping out here is you, because you know a proletariat revolution that actually favors the working class hasn't happened yet. You're a fucking liar, dude.
Ended up so poor. That won't be too hard. The simple truth is that history and historical conflict has far more to it than class struggle.
He didn't say class struggle was the only thing behind the major events in history. It was the main one, which I do kind of disagree with. I take a more intersectional approach to these things.
History is littered with people who have fought and died for things that have nothing economic self-interest. For example, we could take a person I'll only refer to as OBL for fear of triggering the YouTube demonetization, BL for fear of triggering the YouTube demonetization on the United States, the most powerful country in the world, and many more joined it with degrees that should have given them countless opportunities to pursue their own self-interests, only to return to living in caves as their forefathers did. You can't explain.
They believe that by emphasizing how big of a threat jihadist Islam was to the US, that would lead us to stop destabilizing their infrastructure, so of course there's a class element there.
That through class conflict, and so anyone who's willing to say the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle is quite foolish indeed. Now, if this was just how the left viewed
wrong.
things in the 1800s when Marx was around, and they let go of it after the data came back showing he was wrong about Africa, that'd be acceptable.
When the fuck did he talk about African trade investments? I'd like a citation for that, please.
Instead, the left has stuck their fingers in their ears, and they still insist that all the conflicts of the world can be explained through class struggle alone.
That's not true.
An example of proto-imperialism, and they apply the same flawed reasoning that Marx did to his own way of imperialism.
No, because most of them were there for only religious purposes and knew they weren't going to acquire an inheritance. But obviously, there's a material element and a class element to people getting paid to go crusading, okay?
Tension is that since feudal Europe had inheritance laws such that the eldest son inherited everything, the younger sons of each family would find it in their economic interest to go to the Holy Land to get land of their own to settle down in. Sounds reasonable, so the majority of the Crusaders went to the Holy Land, whether they were a second son or spent money to do it by and large. They took out loans to buy weapons, armor, transportation.
No, the people who knew they had an inheritance invested in hiring soldiers.
Which definitely wasn't in their economic interest. In material terms, most of them got nothing out of the experience except a bunch of debt to pay back with interest. In spiritual...
Capitalists make bad investments all the time, and that doesn't refute the fact that there's a material element to the Crusades. Okay, let's say they volunteer, alright? Even there's a material and a class element there, because they think they're going to heaven.
Terms, however, they got forgiveness for all their sins, acting as a free ticket to heaven. Considering that every other
some fucking religious bullshit.
form of killing was considered a free ticket to hell in those times, that was rather important for these professional killers. And so this conflict, just like many others, shows that people will often fighting and dying instead of fighting and dying for what they believe, which you can't explain through Marx's understanding of history.
Isn't it in their material interest to go to heaven? Because brainwashed religious Puritans believe that this life is only liminal, and that heaven is the final destination, which is, of course, in their self-interest. I've literally found a material element in your attempted refutations without doing any research at all. So, like, we know this guy's a fucking liar.
The left, of course, has addressed these issues with their predictions by doing what they do best, infighting. Today, the class reductionists for saying the class is behind in every major divide in society. Normally, these are from people who think there should be more
He thought it was the main force, not the only force.
Orientation, trans issues, race issues, and other miscellaneous nonsense.
All of which you're wrong on.
Marx, back when he was still alive, wrote to the American Socialists advising them to purge these groups from their membership, as it was far more important than that whole overthrowing capitalism thing.
Source?
You can always count on leftists to stay focused. In the end, the Marxist perception of history and economics is just a bunch of people pushing for their own...
You couldn't be focused enough to edit out your fucking breaths.
...self-interest succeeds at modeling neither history nor economics. Whether it's in their self-interest to do something or not, sometimes people's feelings just don't care about your facts.
Crusaders thought they would go to heaven, so of course that's in their class interest. It's the idea of superstructure.
The Communist Manifesto ends by calling for the workers of the world to unite, but this ignores the fact that the workers of the world might not have that much to unite over. Sometimes
they can unite against bootlickers like you.
They're far more willing to put aside their self-interest and proletarian unity to fight for their community, nation, race, ideals, religion, or anything else. You can dismiss this as false consciousness as much as you like.
Do you not think there's a material element there?
Until you're ready to admit the legitimacy of causes other than class and your economic self-interest, you're not going to convince anyone that your ideals are the way to go, and those are just the facts.
He never said class was the only mover of history. Holy fuck, this guy understands nothing. No. Okay, so I'm Xing out of this video right now. Look, just the facts. This video was 8 minutes long. The other video was 16 minutes long. Or, no, your video was 8 minutes long. You have had a 16-minute long bitch fest. You understand nothing about Marxism. You probably read the first couple sentences of the fucking Wikipedia page about it. And from there, you think you have every understanding when you're at the top of the fucking Dunning-Kruger hill. You understand nothing, you rely only off of your feelings, and you have had a 16-minute bitch fest. Stop strawmanning, stop lying for a living, and actually live up to your name. Actually adhere to some sort of fact or steelman version of a position. Stop having bitch fests, okay?